Holla ballers, what's going on? And as the title suggests, I'm going to raid again in Warlords of Draenor for a number of reasons. One, raiding is why I play this game, and when I stopped raiding to focus on building my channel to a comfortable level, it also came with it the fact that I had no real reason to log in during the day other than to produce stuff for YouTube, and that's not really why I play. I don't log in to do dailies, I don't log in to do anything like that. I log in to raid. The only reason I would ever do dailies and whatnot is if there was a real reason to benefit my character in terms of raiding. So as I look towards Warlords of Draenor, and many of you will do the same, I have to decide one thing. If I'm going to raid again, what the fuck am I going to play? It's an interesting topic, and a lot that you guys might get wrong when you decide on what to play. Some people will pick a character and stick with it for all time, through thick and thin. But I have the luxury of having some choice, and that's something we need to consider, especially when deciding on what to play and what to focus on, because ideally I'd like to get some practice on my possible selections before Warlords of Draenor to remind myself whether or not I actually enjoy those classes. A classic mistake is picking something that seems overpowered, and you're going to have a comfortable time, and then you realise, this class isn't really for me. What I'm not looking for in this video is suggestions, because most people tend to just say play the class that they play. That's fine and dandy. This isn't going to affect my decision, but I'm going to talk you through the process I go through when doing this, because I have done this before. I did this during Wrath of the Lich King at the very end, when I decided to move away from tanking to be a DPS role, and I eventually landed on the Death Knight, which worked out very well for me. I got my world first and whatnot, and yeah, it was a lot of fun. So what am I looking for? This is the first question you should ask whenever you're going to be picking a class to play, is what role do you want to fulfill? Because a lot of people get that wrong, and they try and commit to something that they can't quite do. What I want in a guild, and remember, when you look for a guild, you're looking for one that suits you, not making it so you suit them. I'm looking for a guild that I can raid in probably 2 or 3 times a week, given that I have a child and commitments outside and work, and sometimes my day gets a little bit screwed up, but probably has the progress of a guild that raids probably 4 or 5 times a week. They're probably going to have that, because I don't want slow progress. I certainly don't want to be hindered by them wiping forever on whatever heroic content happens to be out, or the mythic content. I'm looking for a guild that's going to allow me to raid 2 or 3 times a week while they will continue to raid. I will focus heavily on progression raiding. That will be my target. I want to be there for the progress. The farm stuff never really interests me. I'm happy to give up my spot while other people gain loot. I would just appreciate being there for progress and stuff and commit 100% to that. So, as that being said, that kind of counts tanking out. As much as tanking is my main love, tanking is one of those roles where you kind of need to be there for at least most of the raids. So, being a tank, that kind of counts me out. So, that counts out the Brewmaster, that counts out the Guardian, and the Prot Warrior. So we're looking at probably a DPSer, maybe a healer. My only issue with healers is that I tend to gear up very heavily for healing, and then healing kind of gets lost in the mire, and we eventually start cutting down healers. Not that I couldn't then switch to DPS, especially given the Mists of Pandaria style, not the Mists of Pandaria, the Warlords style of changing gear based on what your current spec is. So, let's get through this, shall we? The Warrior. Historically, my favourite class in World of Warcraft. Also, the least played class of Mists of Pandaria for a number of reasons. One, Fury. I haven't enjoyed Fury since Wrath of the Lich King, really. The proc-based style of play really detracts from what I feel Fury's strong at, which is being just furious, brutal attacks. Few but furious. Nice, fun play, hitting hard all the goddamn time. Now, they do hit hard, but the playing of the Raging Blows and the Wild Strikes and whatnot, they just feel flimsy, they feel awkward, it doesn't feel fun to me compared to that older style, so I kind of deferred away from that. I really don't like what they've done with Arms. Arms' style of play right now, with combinations of Slam with the Heroic Strike, and it feels like they're trying to make it more difficult than it needs to be without actually adding any difficulty. Fury and Arms aren't hard specs to play, but they just have all this sort of excess mayonnaise slapped all over their normal meaty sandwich, is a good way to describe it, in my opinion. Similarly with Prot, although we said we weren't playing player tank, just the fact that the shield barrier, shield block thing still puts me off. Every time I play it, I just find it cumbersome and unnecessary to have this sort of fictional bubble that I'm putting around myself, but that always goes to an old school feeling. So I kind of had to count the Warrior out, unless we're going to see some major redesigns in Warlords of Draenor, which is something we always have to bear in mind. Are they going to change something dramatically about your class like they did with the Warlocks? Perhaps. But as it stands, probably not the Warrior. The Priest. Shadow was one of my favourite specs in all of Mists of Pandaria. I adored Shadow, but we've also seen several posts coming out from Blizzard that the Priest and the Shadow Priest is actually going to be not balanced around single target DPS. The fact that they have a relatively simple and powerful AoE spell is something that's detracting from their single target power. I really hate that. I did a video on the idea that that's just not fair, because the only thing we can definitely guarantee per boss fight is that there will be a boss. AoE and all that is situational at best. I would rather have a worse AoE, where the rest of the group contributes to it in some fashion, than have gimpier single target DPS. When it comes to the healing, one has to say that the Priest is the most versatile of all the healers. Having two options of different healing specs is really, really good. But Dis does not appeal to me at all. I have always been a classically holy priest ever since the days of Vanilla, which is my original raid spec, was a holy priest. And holy, with its throughput and just putting out big solid heals, is what I always consider to be the classic healer. As much as I appreciate, and I think most of us can appreciate, what power and utility a Dis priest brings, I would kind of hate to be lumped into that spec, which tends to happen historically through the last few expansions. Everything we've seen is that holy starts kind of cool, and then very quickly as Dis picks up gear, the bubbles become so effective that we need to start bringing more and more Dis priests, because their utility is so high, and therefore that's off-putting to me with the priest. So the priest is probably going to get left behind in this choice. The hunter is one I've been really considering recently. I've played a few games on him today, and the reason for that is the way they're designed right now, if we're basing it on that, is that all three specs are pretty much interchangeable, and I quite like that. If one of them becomes more powerful than the other, it doesn't really mean a dramatic change in playstyle. That appeals to me, because sometimes you'll have three specs. If we take the rogue, for example, although we're not there, if one spec becomes dramatically more powerful, it could be a spec you really don't like, and the playstyle is extremely different from spec to spec. It actually appeals to me that the hunter doesn't have that burden. But it might have. Warlords of Draenor has brought up several concerns with the hunters, that all the specs aren't really unique. It was actually one of the things I mentioned in the class for longer term hunters. They don't like the lack of uniqueness, with spells being interchangeable, with Black Arrow just replacing Chimera Shot and just replacing Kill Command. Then that's a problem. But it's not quite a problem for me. The only drawback for me right now with the hunter is that it's a pet class. Pet micromanagement and the reliance on a pet DPS has always been a negative in my eyes, because sometimes your pet will just die, or you have to put an excess amount of control into making sure your pet lives. Otherwise, your DPS just suffers massively, which can be a bit of a big problem. But I have to say, the hunter is in there in the possibilities, I think. When it comes to the Druid, I look at the Druid as having two really, or if not three, really outstanding specs and one really bad spec in my eyes. And this is why I don't really want opinions on these, because some people love these specs, and that's fine. Guardian I quite enjoy, but as we said, I can't really play a tank because that would be detrimental to the guild and it'd be a burden they shouldn't have to carry. Tree is great. I love playing my Tree Druid. I love being resto. I love the style of play. I love the amount of instant casts involved with it. I love the fact that I have a lot of tools and a lot of mobility, and I can affect various parts of the raid in different ways. I really enjoy that. Balance is my favourite Druid spec. Balance is something that I adored throughout a lot of Mists of Pandaria. I did some extra videos on Balance, purely because I just enjoyed playing it. I was spending so long playing it, it was worth making some videos because I was having a ton of fun. Feral, however, not so much. What I'm always wary of is that one spec just becomes massively outdated, and then your raid spot is kind of lost before you start. So you always need to be ready to be able to change over to different specs, which is again another pro towards the hunter. If Balance suddenly gets some game-breaking change, then my other switch is over to either Tree, which might be full in the guild, or over to Feral, which I very much don't enjoy. You might say, preacher, but the specs are mostly balanced now. I used to play a Druid full-time for about 6 months in my old guild. I switched to a Druid because we had too many warriors and we wanted an ideal tanking team. At the same time, Blizzard massively broke Feral Druids to the point where I was heading above everybody else in terms of DPS, but at the same time, I wasn't enjoying playing it. Some of you will be like, what? Yeah, in a world where people were doing 6k DPS, a Feral Druid was pulling 8 to 9k. That's the difference between 1 and number 2 on the damage meter when I was playing my Feral Druid. That was during Ulduar. And I was stuck. I had to keep playing it all the goddamn time because it was so goddamn powerful. Which kind of leaves me with either Balance or Resto. Not too bad a choice. It's got to be said, not too bad a choice. Druids also have the utility of bringing lots and lots of useful spells, situational but changeable. Typhoons, Ursol's Vortex, all these things are very, very cool, and as we've seen in Mists of Pandaria, very much needed on certain boss encounters, which makes me kind of feel cool about my raid spot. So, a possibility there. The Warlock is out. You might say, why? They're so goddamn powerful. They do so much DPS, so much power. I've played a Warlock twice, both times for Method, which means I can play it pretty damn well. I always did well in the class, but I never really enjoyed it. Heresy, I know. There's something about it. One, it's a pet class, as I said with the Hunter, which I don't particularly enjoy. The other is just the general style of play. It changes so dramatically with the Warlock, and there's a lot of effort that goes into it that's almost unnecessary in comparison to its brothers in the other sort of range feel. There's so much min-maxing to be done on micro dots, and if you're compelled, like I am, to really get the max out of your character, it kind of becomes a lesson in frustration sometimes as you're waiting for ideals and procs not to be wasted, and anything that gives you power with a Warlock can affect every single spell you cast, and you have to rethink them. And that it's not so much of a problem if you're prepared to let a few of them slide, but eventually you end up in a situation where you're trying to recast Immolate a million times because you've ever got a slightly more powerful one and things like that. And there's so much micromanagement involved with the Warlock that it puts me off. One of the styles that I love about playing in raids is that I also love to take in the environment and the encounter. A lot of times when I was playing a Warlock and trying to min-max it, I actually ended up staring at my bars quite a lot and watching procs endlessly, rather than just enjoying myself, was the general feeling there. Shaman is out as well. Elemental feels far too lazy, Enhancement feels far too fussy, and Resto just feels somewhere smacked in the middle without really being amazing. Always still a bit of a hybrid, still carrying that hybrid burden in my eyes. Maybe that will change. We don't know. Everything is subject to change with Warlords of Draenor. But both those styles of play in terms of DPS don't appeal to me. So having to switch between them, as we said, as healers get more powerful, we tend to drop healers in favor of being a DPSer. I kind of feel that I would be of the opinion that, you know what? I don't want to switch to DPS. Is anybody who can replace me? And then maybe one of my 3 or so raid nights a week is actually wasted where I can't raid because I don't particularly want to play that class. I certainly don't want to build alternate sets of gear. Although there has to be something said that maybe the lazy style of Elemental is something that might appeal to me after healing for quite a while. The healing style itself doesn't appeal to me, especially when I compare it to something like a Resto Druid or a Monk, which are my favourite healers, and even the Holy Priest. So it's not looking too favourable. All those 2 of the DPS specs, 2 out of 3 specs just don't appeal, and the healing spec is less fun than others, in my opinion. For my taste, anyway. Mage. There's always a problem with the Mage. One is that you might end up playing Arcane, and Lord knows I hate Arcane, and they don't seem to want to change it. And there's always that fear with the Mage. The problem with the Mage is suddenly one spec becomes dominant out of your 3, and the specs are very varied. So you might love Fire, but you have to play Arcane. You might love Frost, but you have to play Fire. Every now and again, I just like playing a different spec on my Mage. Whenever I log him in to play him, I'll look at the first thing I do is actually open my talent tree and see, which one do I want to play today? And it's almost certainly either Fire or Frost, and Arcane never really gets a look in. But as we all know, at some point during at least the last 3 expansions, Arcane has become very powerful, and then you're kind of lumbered with it, and it's just not fun. It hasn't been for a long time for me anyway, so I'm always worried that if I choose a Mage, I'm going to end up lumbered with one spec for a long-ass time. If I was to compare it to, say, a Warlock, well, you can almost guarantee with a Warlock at least 2 out of the 3 specs are going to be good. Let's say right now, Affliction and Destruction are actually very, very solid, and Demonology even has its place, so you have that variety, but you're not tied to one of them. The Mages are always tied to a spec. Whichever is the most powerful at the time is the one you're going to play, and your choice is non-existent. The Rogue. Kind of a similar issue with the Shaman here and the Mage. And that is one spec ever becomes sort of dominant. Usually 2 out of the 3. The problem is that we don't know what kind of subtle changes they will make. Notice the hint there on subtle. But then again, what we might see is things like, okay, you can only play combat. Okay, well, I don't particularly have that much fun with combat. Combat's great every now and again. I like the fact that I can just pop Adrenaline Rush and Blade Flurry and I chop everything to pieces. But sometimes I want to play Assassin, sometimes I want to play Sub. But inevitably, one is better than the other. And rogues seem to have fallen into a weird spot, which I both like and dislike, is that they bring so much utility, especially with subspec, is that you tend to be off doing things that aren't really DPSing. This is a DPS class after all. Rogues have a lot of tools at their disposal, and that makes them option number one to go off and be heroic elsewhere in the fight. That's fun every now and again. It's quite nice to go and be the guy who's off doing his own private mission, enabling the raid's success. You are granting them the freedom to continue and focus on other things while you are off and carrying this weight. And I have no problem carrying that weight. But to do it week after week, eventually you're kind of in the opinions of, you know what, I rolled a DPS class and I kind of want to play it. On top of that, I'm kind of forced to play a spec I don't particularly enjoy. I'm at the mercy of Blizzard with the rogue. I'm at the mercy of Blizzard. Sometimes I like assassination, sometimes I like combat, and sometimes I like sub. But for a long, long period of time, perhaps I don't like one of those specs and I want to change it, but now I'm actually detrimental to my guild. It's a situation I've been in so many times in the past that it doesn't really appeal to me to do that again. Monkey! The Mistweaver Monk, as I said, I can't really play Brewmaster. Mistweaver Monk is my favourite healing spec. However, it's pretty common knowledge now that it's going to undergo quite dramatic changes because of the fact that they don't care about mana. God, that transmog's disgusting. I apologise. So there's problems. My favourite healing spec easily in the game is Mistweaver, although Mistweaver is hugely situational. Unless something really changes, they are great sometimes and awful the next. So many of my friends who play monks have been benched and benched and benched over and over again, and that's never fun. If I'm able to raid, I want to be able to log in and actually raid. What I don't want to be is on a useless class. So you say, well, what about Windwalker? Maybe you can help that. Windwalker is, again, it feels a bit like Enhancement Shaman to me. I find it very clumsy, overlapping, and just not that fun. It produces great numbers. And remember, none of this is in context of how much DPS they do, because that is always subject to change. It's how it feels to play. And the Windwalker, not really for me. So I'm kind of stuck with the idea of being Mistweaver. And that means that when I'm doing solo play, I kind of have to be a Windwalker, which I don't particularly enjoy. Yeah, probably not the monk for those reasons. So let's go over to here. The Pally. Now, I've been pretty brutal about the Pally on a lot of occasions. I find Ret to be cumbersome and fidgety. Prot to be kind of boring and stale, and Holy to just be Holy straight up putting out heals, and I certainly don't like the Eternal Flame Absorb style of play where you're healing people who don't need healing. But there's always a big caveat, and I said this at the end of the Ret guides and the Prot guides, the Paladin is just a lot of fun. Despite what I just said mechanically, the Paladin is just a lot of fun. They're so spectacular. They really are. If I was going to play a Paladin, it would most certainly be aiming to be Retribution, and it also allows me on occasion to switch over to Prot when the guild needs it. If a tank doesn't show up or wants a day off, I am more than happy to fill that role. What I don't want to be is a full-time tank. Retribution's kind of fine, as we've seen add-ons like CLC Ret actually overcome that cumbersome feel that comes with playing Ret if you're trying to straight up maximize it up. But I will obviously aim to get rid of that add-on and then play it as it's supposed to be. And who knows, maybe in Warlords Draenor that'll get some revamp. The Paladin also brings so much utility a raid in terms of its hands and blessings and whatnot, that it's definitely got an appealing sense to me there. It provides me that ability to be a melee and to switch over to a tank when needed. That's got to be in the choice pool, is to be the old Ret Paladin, despite the fact that Blood Elves are getting a horrible, horrible, horrible racial. The same goes for the DK. Most people would probably consider the DK to be my number one choice, and for good reason as well. You wouldn't be wrong to say that this isn't very, very high up the list. The DK, I like all three specs. Not many classes I can say that about, is I really enjoy all three specs, and they're varied. As much as I like the Hunter for having all three specs, they are very similar. The DK, I enjoy all three specs, and they're varied. They play very, very differently. So I'm always having fun. Also, each spec tends to have its use, similar to the Warlock, is that sometimes Frost is amazing. I need a ton of burst AoE, and then Frost is going to bring the fucking noise. If I need just constant sustained damage, or even sustained in some fashion, then Unholy is going to rock my world. And if I need to, again, like the Paladin, switch over to tank, then I have that fun as well. As tanking is one of my main joys in the game, I have the opportunity to do that. So these are the things that I'm considering, guys. This is the way I look at it in terms of what to choose. This decision isn't easy. A lot of people just go, you know what, I really like the look of that class. I really like the look of that. Oh, I met a really powerful Shadow Priest who owned face. I want to be like that guy. Lots to consider when you decide a class, because you're going to be investing potentially 12 months of your time into this class, assuming no other superb game comes along. So we have to be careful. What you don't want to do is pick a class that you've never tried out or never played, and then suddenly you don't like it, and then you have to leave your guild and switch around and whatnot. And more importantly, you don't want to leave people in the lurch. You certainly don't want to pick a class that, you're 50-50 on, you get a lot of gear on it, and then suddenly that gear goes down the pan, because you just can't be arsed playing. And more importantly, you don't enjoy playing. You log in and you're like, ugh, which is what I often felt with the Warlock, is, oh great, I'm raiding tonight. One of the best guilds in the world, and I got to play a fucking Warlock, GG. And I just didn't enjoy it. And therefore everything that was given to me was essentially a waste, because I'm not going to stick with it. That transmog though. What to pick? What a decision to make. Tough stuff. Every class has its pros and cons. Some that I can easily rule out. Mr. Shaman, Mr. Monk, probably not. Mr. Mage, probably not. Despite how much fun I have with them, I have to be wary of the possible drawbacks. Interesting stuff, guys. Well, that's my thought process on it. If any of you deciding to choose a class for Warlords of Draenor, that's how I'm doing it. All right, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.